During the tensest years of the Cold War, while the superpowers threatened the world with nuclear weapons and the United States faced its own internal wounds, a pastor from Georgia presented the planet with a completely different kind of weapon. Silent weapon. A weapon that did not kill. A weapon that changed consciences. This is the story of Martin Luther King Jr., the leader who won America's deepest war without firing a single shot. The story of the strategy of nonviolence and how it toppled the legal pillars of racial segregation. The civil rights movement did not suddenly emerge in 1955. It was the accumulated response to centuries of slavery, segregation, and institutional violence. After World War II, the U.S. tried to present itself to the world as a defender of freedom, but domestic reality told a different story. The Jim Crow laws in the South enforced a brutal system of segregation in schools, public transport, and every aspect of daily life. At the same time, a new generation was rising. Black veterans returned from war, having fought for democracy abroad, only to be denied it at home. A growing black middle class was gaining economic power and demanding its rightful place in society. This created an unavoidable tension. How could America lead the free world while denying basic civil rights to millions of its own citizens? The stage was set for a conflict that would define the soul of a nation. Everything changed in December 1955 when Rosa Parks, a quiet seamstress and seasoned activist, refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It was not a tired, spontaneous gesture. It was a strategic decision by an organized movement waiting for the right moment. Her arrest was the spark. Community leaders, including a young, charismatic pastor named Martin Luther King Jr., formed the Montgomery Improvement Association. They called for a total boycott of the city's buses. The logic was simple but powerful. Economic non-cooperation. For 381 days, black citizens walked, carpooled, and organized their own transportation systems, crippling the bus company's finances. This wasn't just a protest. It was a sustained campaign of discipline and solidarity. The boycott demonstrated how nonviolence could destabilize an unjust system from within, without using force. The battle ended not in the streets, but in the highest court of the land. When the Supreme Court declared bus segregation unconstitutional, Montgomery was the first major victory, and it proved that a new form of warfare had arrived. King's strategy had deep intellectual and spiritual roots. It drew inspiration from the Christian gospel's message of love for one's enemies, from the philosophical resistance of thinkers like Thoreau and Tolstoy, and most directly from Mahatma Gandhi's successful campaign to free India from British rule. King adapted these ideas into 6 core principles. He taught that nonviolence is not passive resistance. It's an active, courageous, and highly disciplined form of struggle. Its goal is not to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win them over, to awaken their sense of moral shame. A key tactic was creative suffering, voluntarily accepting blows without retaliating. A powerful act designed to expose the brutality of the oppressor. This approach was perfectly suited for a democratic society with a free press. King understood that the images of peaceful protesters being met with violence would shock the conscience of the nation and the world, creating unstoppable pressure for change. In 1963, the movement targeted what was known as the most segregated city in America, Birmingham, Alabama. King knew that if they could break the back of segregation there, they could win anywhere. The plan, codenamed Project C for confrontation, involved sit-ins, boycotts, and marches designed to fill the city's jails. When adult volunteers ran low, the movement made a controversial but brilliant decision to involve children and teenagers in the Children's Crusade. Thousands of students marched. The world watched in horror as the city's public safety commissioner, Bull Connor, unleashed police dogs and high-pressure fire hoses on them. Those images, broadcast on national television, were the breaking point. Americans could no longer ignore the violent reality of segregation. From his jail cell, King penned his famous letter from Birmingham jail, a powerful defense of civil disobedience. The strategy worked perfectly. The violent reaction of the system exposed its own moral bankruptcy, turning the media into the movement's most powerful ally and forcing the Kennedy administration to intervene. Just a few months later, in August 1963, the movement reached its symbolic peak. More than 250,000 people, black and white, from all walks of life, converged on the nation's capital for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was a massive logistical feat, coordinating diverse groups like the NAACP, the Urban League, and the more radical Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. In the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered the speech that would cement his place in history. I Have a Dream was more than just a beautiful piece of oratory. It was a brilliant political statement, framed the struggle for civil rights not as a sectional issue, but as the fulfillment of America's founding promises of liberty and justice for all. By invoking the American dream, King challenged the nation to live up to its own ideals. The speech resonated globally, presenting a stark contrast to the Soviet Union's oppression and amplifying America's moral authority during the Cold War. 2 years later, the fight shifted to Selma, Alabama, the epicenter of the struggle for voting rights. Although black citizens were a majority in many southern counties, a web of discriminatory literacy tests, poll taxes, and outright intimidation prevented them from registering to vote. In March 1965, activists planned a 54-mile march from Selma to the state capital, Montgomery. As they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met by a wall of state troopers who brutally attacked the unarmed, peaceful marchers with clubs and tear gas. The event, which became known as Bloody Sunday, was broadcast across the nation. The shocking images galvanized public opinion like never before. President Lyndon B. Johnson, a Southerner himself, was forced to act. He addressed a joint session of Congress, invoking the civil rights movement's own anthem, "We Shall Overcome," and demanded the passage of a federal voting rights law. The subsequent march to Montgomery, protected by federal troops, became a triumphant procession. That summer, Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a landmark victory that dismantled the legal barriers to black political participation. While King championed nonviolence at home, he grew increasingly critical of America's use of violence abroad, particularly in the Vietnam War. He saw a direct link between the money being spent on the war and the poverty and inequality that plagued American cities. In a famous 1967 speech, he called the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. This stance was highly controversial. It alienated him from President Johnson and many moderate allies, and was viewed as a betrayal by some who felt he should focus solely on racial issues. Meanwhile, the FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, saw King as a dangerous radical and subjected him to intense surveillance, wiretaps, and a campaign to discredit him. King's willingness to connect the struggles for civil rights, economic justice, and peace demonstrated his evolution from a civil rights leader into a radical critic of American militarism and capitalism. By 1968, King had broadened his focus. He was planning the Poor People's Campaign, a multiracial coalition that would demand an economic bill of rights for all impoverished Americans. He argued that winning civil rights was not enough if people didn't have a good job, a decent home, and a quality education. This shift made him even more dangerous in the eyes of the establishment. In the spring of that year, he traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, to support a strike by black sanitation workers who were protesting abysmal pay and dangerous working conditions. It was there on the evening of April 4th, while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. He was just 39 years old. His death sparked riots in cities across America, but his legacy of nonviolence endured. His philosophy inspired movements for freedom and democracy around the globe. From the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa to the pro-democracy movements in Eastern Europe, Martin Luther King did not defeat armies. He did not command tanks. He did not fire a shot. And yet, he forever changed the course of the world's greatest democracy. He understood that true power isn't the ability to inflict violence, but the ability to endure it for a cause, to transform suffering into a force for redemption. His victory was not over a government, but over a mindset. A victory won not by the force of arms, but by moral force. He proved that a determined, disciplined, and nonviolent movement could bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. If this video helped you understand the depth of Martin Luther King's strategy of nonviolence, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. This supports our work and ensures you continue receiving content that illuminates history and transforms the present. Thanks for watching.